Welcome back to Unfiltered. Everyone's watching Stranger Things right now, and a big part of the reason that it's #1 on the Netflix charts is the nostalgia it creates from the 80s.
Why are you Venkman?
Because I'm Venkman.
No, I'm Venkman.
Why can't there just be two Venkmans?
Because there's only one Venkman in real life.
Wipe out!
Didn't you see the sign, dummy? No food or drinks on the ring.
I'm an 80s kid. Listen, nostalgia aside, the Democrats' political crises of the 80s seem eerily similar to the ones we're facing now in 2022. Inflation sitting at 9.1% right now. That's the largest increase since 1981, the year Jimmy Carter left office. Russia invaded Ukraine in February, just like the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in December of 1979 during the Carter administration. Folks, it's like we're repeating history here. I'm reminded of the quote from the novel Those Who Remain. Remember this: hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. So are those hard times of today creating strong men? Gosh, I hope so. Joining me now is Hoover Institution Senior Fellow Victor Davis Hanson. Sir, welcome to the show. What good is a playbook, Victor? The playbook the Reagan administration had of tax cuts and sound money, if we're not going to use it and just walk ourselves into another crisis? I mean, are we just doomed to this cycle of stupidity?
Well, I think we has to be narrowed, Dan. It's the left has sort of rejected the entire idea of conventional or received wisdom. I mean, it used to be that Democrats agreed with Republicans that you had to have a border with unique customs, traditions, civic culture. They don't believe that. There is no border. It's nihilistic. They used to believe that there were two genders. There were a few people that were dysphoric. They were transvestites. They were transsexuals, but they were not a third sex, so you didn't go all the way to the point where people were in the opposite locker rooms with different genitalia, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't exist anymore. There used to be an idea that if you printed money and you had fewer goods due to supply chain problems or labor shortages, you had inflation. Modern monetary theory said no. And finally, critical race theory or critical legal theory suggested that if you have laws, they're constructs, they reflect the particular interest of the white male ruling class, and therefore they need to be ignored. Whereas the ancient conventional wisdom said, if you steal a candy bar, you have to be punished because not that candy bars are essential to civilization, but the idea that you don't steal anything is. But this administration and the left have blown up all of these conventional wisdoms. And it's sort of like the 80s, but it's much more intense. I don't know whether COVID or the lockdown accelerated the phenomenon, but this party was the people in the 80s that were on the fringes, and they were pressuring the Democratic Party to go left, and the Democratic Party had McGovern, and then they'd had Carter, and those were, disastrous, and then they would nominate Mondale. That was a disaster, and finally, the only answer to Reaganism and the solution and the remedy was they tried to emulate him with Bill Clinton, tried to talk like he was a conservative. And that's where we are now. They're going to either change or they're going to destroy their party, and hopefully not us with them.
Well, that leads me to my second question. You may have answered it in advance, but maybe there's a silver lining to this, right? I mean, we had, what was it, the Democrat Leadership Council, after they got crushed twice by Ronald Reagan and then lost to George H.W. Bush. They said, okay, this isn't working. We had Rudy Giuliani in New York after the crime rate exploded, and people said, we've had enough of this. Do you think the silver lining is that finally that, politics is a kitchen table issue? It's hitting the Democrats at their kitchen table, and maybe there's some kind of renaissance of common sense?
I think so, especially because there's one big difference from the 80s. The Democratic Party had this narrative that they were the party that gave immigrants assistance and federal support and empathy and therefore open borders. That was their constituency. But in fact, they hate the middle class and the lower middle class. And what's happening, we've got 40 or 50 million immigrants, many of them so-called non-white, and they're trying to be upwardly mobile, and this party despises them in two ways. It doesn't care about the effect upon them in terms of energy, gas, diesel, job, inflation. All of these issues they don't care about, and yet they're central to the Hispanic community, for example. And then second, they advance issues that no one cares about, but particularly immigrants find aggravating and annoying, and that are things like radical climate change, radical third trimester abortion, radical gun control, radical transgenderism. And the result is that they have alienated one of their prime constituencies, which they couldn't afford to alienate because they'd already alienated the white middle class and the white lower middle class. So I think that's going to really hit them in the next midterm and presidential election, because people in the center and the right are going to say, wait a minute, you're not so liberal at all. You're kind of, I don't know, I don't want to use the R word, but you don't seem to care about people of color that are aspiring to be like your bicoastal elite. So that's a real vulnerability in there, and you can feel it among the Democratic ranks. They're starting to get a little paranoid about it.
Yeah, you see it in the poll numbers amongst Hispanics as well. Victor Davis Hanson, thanks for your insights. I appreciate it.
Thank you.